I'll have Christine go first just to tell you all about SVP, and then I can pick up and take over the details.
All right. Hi, everyone. Really good to see you all. So I'll just start by sharing a little bit about our organization. So we are Social Venture Partners LA, though hot off the presses from a few hours ago, we are in the midst of a name change. So we will be Social Justice Partners LA moving forward. So really excited about that because it is a reflection of the work that we've been doing in community. So you'll see on the screen, our official mission is about investing in, expanding, and connecting communities that are advancing racial and social justice. So essentially, our goal is to bring folks together who care deeply about justice and to channel our collective power, our resources, to learn together and to really invest in the work on the front lines, whether that's folks doing justice work, organizing on the front lines, policy change, or our frontline workers who are providing direct services, as we'll be talking about today. So really happy to be in community with all of you. And we have many initiatives at SVP, SJP, and one of them is our racial equity initiative that was created and now led by Kelly Poole, our Director of Racial Equity Initiative and Homelessness. So Kelly, I will pass it to you.
Thanks, Christine. Thanks you all for sharing in the chat. I love seeing you all, old friends, new friends, friends we're going to make partnerships and relationships with. So as Christine said, we lead a racial equity and homelessness initiative here at SVP. We are not direct service providers. I always feel like it's important to share that with folks up front. We do not work in the housing sector, although Christine and I and Frank and a couple of our other colleagues have backgrounds in housing and homelessness. At its core, the Racial Equity Initiative is about people, right? So it's a leadership development initiative that focuses on supporting individual change, bringing new leaders into the sector, and then obviously shifting our sector to one that's centered on inclusion by retaining workers and supporting folks across the sector. So we do a lot of work outside of the sector to work with current leaders through a racial equity fellowship that we run. We send out an SVP post with middle to senior level jobs in the housing and homelessness sector. So if you're recruiting for any C-suite leaders or directors or above positions, please feel free to share them with us. We love to get them out to our network. And then we work with senior level leaders to think about organizational change, shifts that they can make internally with their staff or themselves, really just to shore up the talent and build a deeper bench, strengthen the organizations, and support the workers that do work to end homelessness here in LA County every day. So today we'll talk a little bit about this opportunity. I think on the next slide, there is sort of an agenda overview. Great, so you've heard from us. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the background on the Supporting Frontline Workers Fund and then hand it over to Frank to really get into the nuts and bolts. We'll stop for Q&A, so you'll have time to ask questions. You can keep putting stuff in the public chat, or if you just are curious about a question and don't want to do it publicly, you can send it to myself, Christine, or Frank, and we'll help you sort it out. So this is the Supporting Frontline Workers grant. It is directly to organizations. So we are so grateful to our funders at Cedars-Sinai who made a significant investment in SVP. So this total investment is $3 million. We're using $1 million of it this year to provide these frontline grants to organizations. We'll have that same opportunity next year. And then it is also wrapped in a broader effort to explore living wages, pay equity, and sort of full cost recovery across the housing and homelessness sector. So we're doing a little bit of frontline intervention and then obviously working upstream to think about policy and systems change as well as it relates to supporting frontline workers. So we're grateful for that. We know that the pandemic was hard for you all and your organizations. We know that this is not going to meet the need that everyone has, but we really wanted to use the opportunity to make to get cash, to get money into the hands of frontline workers who were really serving in the earliest days of the pandemic. So we'll get into the weeds, but just wanted to share a little background and overview with you. And I'll pass it over to Frank.
All right, hi everyone. So this is a lot of content here on the screen, so bear with us. For those of you who clicked on the link that I just put up, for the RFP landing page, you'll see not only information, funding parameters, and eligibility, but also the application itself is also on that same landing page. I'm going to go through some of the points and leave it open for Kelly or Christine to add anything, any nuances that I miss. But for some of the funding parameters, we are providing this grant to give to organizations to provide direct cash or cash equivalent to frontline workers who work in, correct me if I'm wrong, daily direct and in-person services to people experiencing homelessness during the early parts of the pandemic. So kind of between right at the get-go, March 2020 to March 2021. So providing direct cash and cash equivalent. Second one is giving directly to frontline workers who make less than $65,000 annually. Again, we want to be able to offer additional money, especially for the work that they've done during that time. And stipends, and this is for your discretion, but stipends must be at a minimum of $500 per frontline worker or a maximum of $1,500. And again, this is distributed directly and not based on a reimbursement model. This is some questions that we got, some emails for folks who already filled out the application, but we are going to be giving those funds over to you at the early part of December 2021, and you will have between December and June to distribute that that money in stipends to your frontline staff by June 2022. So again, we'll provide the money by December 2021, and then you'll have up to June to distribute that money. So you don't have to do it on June, you could do it anytime before, but we want that money to go up by June 2022. And then last but not least is, and we're going to get to the math in a little bit, but organizations can request up to 15% in administrative overhead on the grant itself, not 15% of your total operating budget, but just 15% of just of the money that you're requesting in overhead. So anything that you want to add, Kelly or Christine, on that point before I go into eligibility?
I think that was really good. I think the things that Frank highlighted are really around cash or cash equivalent. Yeah, Dr. Becky, we were just going to say that. So we want cash dollars, money, or like gift cards, I think is probably the most prevalent example of cash equivalent. And then let's see, the other thing is not reimbursable. So we want folks to feel free to use the funds to support themselves however they want. And sometimes that's uncomfortable to be like, I needed to buy this new set of sheets for my apartment. And so we don't want folks to have to submit a reimbursement for all of their details. We know that is tricky, and we're just trusting that orgs can sort of figure out a process. The other thing I'll say is we're hoping really to get the funds out, or at least let you know you've been awarded them early December, so that you can build them into holiday bonuses or end of year things, if that's not a regular thing, but just know our intention is to try to get it if that's what you were thinking. So those are my only additions.
Cool, thanks, Kelly. In terms of eligibility, and again, we're just going to repeat this over and over, in terms of eligibility, so frontline workers could be very broad, but what we're talking about is frontline workers who provided daily, direct, in-person services to people experiencing homelessness during the early parts of the COVID pandemic. So roughly around March 2020 to 2021. So that's the first part. And so this is not just or, this is and. So providing daily direct and in-person services, and must have physical sites located in these specific spas. So this is a part of the Cedars grant, Cedars-Sinai grant, that they requested from these specific locations. Spa 2, San Fernando Valley, Spa 4, Metro LA, Spa 5, West LA, Spa 6, South LA, and or Spa 8, South Bay Harbor. So you just have to have, and correct me if I'm wrong, Kelly, but just a physical location in these areas. So I'm sure we'll get into some of the nuances in the Q&A.
Yeah, I was just answering Eric's question. It is a little bit of a gray area. So we really want the funds to be used for folks who are physical sites and providing services in these service planning areas. We're trying to navigate things. So you need to have headquarters or offices in these areas. You need to be providing services in those areas. And then we'd want to think about, I imagine if you're serving lots of spas, you might have lots of frontline workers, and that this might not make sense in terms of money. So I would just say reach out to us. We definitely have, there's info, contact us. You could submit and put a disclaimer in one of the narrative boxes, like just let us know and we'll try to be in conversation with you all. I'm like, Christine, our knowledgeable one, tell me if I'm saying anything wrong or right.
You are so knowledgeable. I'm just channeling our friends at Cedars-Sinai who provided this funding to us. So just to say a word about why there are specific spas, those are the Cedars-Sinai catchment area. So that's where their funds must go based on their own internal requirements. As Kelly said, it is a gray area if you're located in one spa. And we did talk to them about this, if your outreach workers are working countywide, please do, apply for all of those outreach workers. I think the gray area is if you have a team that has a site in Spa 7 and those outreach workers are explicitly focused on Spa 7, that likely does not fall under the jurisdiction of this grant, but your folks in other spas would be. So if they move around, if they may serve multiple spas, even in the midst of this tough year, if they have worked in multiple spaces, definitely err on the side of inclusion. But if they are strictly in Spa 1, Spa 3, or Spa 7, and that is the only space they work in, then unfortunately they would not be eligible.
And Eric, thanks for adding that in the chat. And I like your follow-up emoji of, ooh. Okay, so I appreciate that. So eligibility, daily direct in person and those specific spas. And now this is where we'll probably get into the Q&A in a second, and then we'll go into gallery view so we can see each other's faces. But the last one is actively engage in the exploration of pay equity and providing a living wage for their frontline workers. So this could look like a salary wage analysis, setting a minimum living wage, a worker survey. So obviously, when it comes to activities around pay equity and living wage, it's going to look different for organizations that are smaller, that have a smaller operating budget. So we kind of left just a narrative box for you in the application, just to say what you are doing. So for organizations that don't have the capacity to do a wage analysis or a survey, this might look like you are convening discussions with your executive team or with all your staff around pay equity and living wage. So just let us know in the application. Again, it's a narrative box on what sort of activities you are all doing. So I'm going to stop it right there unless Kelly or Chrissy want to add anything, and then we'll jump into Q&A.
Yeah, I was just looking at the chat and I'm like, ooh, which one do we go to? So just acknowledging that we see the questions in the chat and we'll try to take them in order. Do folks feel okay if we move to gallery, or do you want to see this text while we're talking?
Oh yeah, let me go back. Good call.
Okay, either way, let us know. We're happy to see each other's faces. I will take great, yep, we'll leave it up. I will take the large nonprofit question. I'll pivot the tax question to Christine. So our intention is, as always, to provide funds to folks who otherwise wouldn't be able to provide this support to their workers. We know that any agency is always going to welcome additional supports because there's always a ton of stuff that we could be doing. And we know that it is true that some of our orgs literally can't raise money. They don't have donors that'll, sort of offset some of their costs. And so it's our intention to provide as much funding as we can to smaller orgs who may not have that ability. So Yeah, so I'll say that there's no caps, there's no restrictions. I do think as you run the numbers as a bigger org, you might realize, oh, I'd probably need the whole $1 million. Like, and I think I can say that we would not do that. We would not give one org all of the money. Don't know if that's okay to say, but I'm just going to say it. We really want to provide, a lot of support for all folks. So I would encourage you to think about that. If you are a big org, you might not, like, you might have frontline case managers that didn't do direct service, like touch service, but you might have a frontline staff that provided daily in-person services for your drop-in center that never closed, right? So there's a little bit of a distinction there. So you may find yourselves applying for that group, or you might only be applying for a small bucket because you have other funds to offset. So if you're a large agency, that's a way to think about it. Could this be a supplement to close a gap that you already have for things you were going to provide? If you are a smaller org, I think it is probably easier to do the math and just see what I would need. We've been encouraging folks to ask for what you think you need. There's a couple narrative boxes on the application form. And I don't think we're beyond being in dialogue. Like if something comes up and it's like, oh, I don't know if we can do this, we could probably do that. I think we're comfortable reaching out. So that's what I would say. I think you should run the math. And if you're like, I'm not going to do this, this doesn't make sense, that's cool, you can opt out. Or if you're just like, I don't actually know how to like navigate this based on my different teams and sites, certainly reach out and let us have that combo with you as well. I'm laughing at the chat. We know frontline workers are not making over 65K. We were trying to like stifle things down, but we use sort of 65K as our standard for living wages across LA. And so in the event that some agency is, paying folks, especially if you're a small agency, like your coordinator might do all things, including run your drop-in center, and they might be, I don't know, maybe over 65K. Anyways, that's probably not true for a lot of you, right? So that threshold might not be there, but we just wanted to make it clear that hopefully anyone under 65K would be receiving these funds. All right, I'm going to pivot to Christine for taxes, and then I'll look at the chat and we'll see to catch up there.
Great, thanks, Kelly, and appreciate you all putting all these questions out there and sharing your thoughts. So I'll speak to this question about providing stipends directly to workers versus having them go through your organizations. And I'll say this was an extensive conversation for us internally and with the funder on this. And ultimately, our intention with these resources and with our broader work is to support more systemic change in the sector toward a living wage for frontline workers. So this feels like an immediate step that we could take to help augment frontline workers' wages. But we were very clear with Cedars-Sinai, and they were excited about the partnership when we shared that part of what we will be doing through these funds is doing a living wage analysis across LA to understand what would it cost to pay frontline workers in the sector a living wage. What is a living, how would we define a living wage, and what's the gap between what we pay as a sector now and what a living wage would look like, and to have that report be a funder-facing report, in part to say to our philanthropic partners and our public sector funders, hey, the current structure of our contracts, of our grants, is not enabling organizations to pay a living wage. So that was part of the reason that we wanted to structure these grants as moving through your organizations, so it can be part of a broader conversation within your organization about what that gap looks like, what it would take to close that gap, to take steps towards living wage or pay equity within your organization. And we'll also say, whether the stipends come through us or through you, the worker, the recipient of the stipend, takes a tax cut on it no matter what. That will come out on the front end or the back end for them. We provided the 15% overhead so that any cost to you, whether it's payroll, taxes, or the staffing to administer the stipends, could be covered on your end. So note that there's that 15% overhead for you all to cover your costs. And ultimately, we're mindful that that the stipend itself takes a tax hit no matter what pathway it goes through. But we were holding that broader intention in mind of let this be a step, we know one small step toward this broader conversation around living wages in our field. And Selena, to your point and your question, hopefully, our dream is that all frontline workers could make $65,000. And we know that that decision isn't in your hands, primarily because of the limitations of our funding structures. All right, so that's what I'll say about that.
Questions I see questions in the chat, criteria, percentage funding, reporting recs, and timelines. So we'll get to those, but just follow-up questions for Christine or myself about timelines and funding and all of that, taxes. Feel free to come off mute if you have okay. All right, we're gonna keep rolling with the questions in the chat. Just let us know if we missed something. So I'll say timeline for March 2020 to March 2021 is because we wanted to be really intentional about sort of daily direct in-person services during the earliest days of the pandemic and also some of the most sort of dangerous days of the pandemic, right? So frontline workers that didn't have access to PPE, that were still going out to your outreach sites, that were still making visits. I think someone asked about permanent supportive housing. Absolutely, right? So that we're doing that daily in-person service really for us in LA, the start of the stay-at-home order through about like the vaccination window when it started. So some of you might work for agencies that totally shut down and you're like, we need to figure this out. Like you weren't running a shelter. And then maybe around January 2021, you're like, okay, we have a protocol and we're doing virtual stuff. We would say if you're in that bucket, you're probably not the bucket we're looking for, right? You transitioned, and even though you were providing direct services, they were virtual. So folks who kept shelters open, transitional housing sites, congregate living facilities, project room key sites, any of your sort of drop-in centers, food pantries, certainly street outreach, that bucket of folks. So timeline, criteria, people experiencing homelessness. I saw the question. Yep, shelter, transitional housing, self-reported, unhoused. I think for this, also, yeah, I think those are the big buckets. I'm like, Frank or Christine, if I'm missing buckets, let me know. Funding percentage, yep, we absolutely will fund a percentage. We invite you to think internally about the percentage. Like if you're internally like, well, if we can't pay everyone, then we can't do this because it creates equity issues inside, then that's cool. Like tell us the thing that you need or do the math sort of on your own about like, we want to fund 15 folks. We had this one outreach team that went out, and ask for that. Otherwise, like we would be left to our own volition to say like, okay, here's the percentage of the request that we could fund. So would encourage you all to do some thinking about it. And then the one thing around reporting requirements, and I think we're going to talk to this, is certainly very minimum. Like we hope our application was very minimum. So you might expect something like that. How many stipends did you end up giving out? We might ask more about progress towards living wage. There were some questions on the app around demographics, things like that. A lot of folks don't have that data and that's okay. So in reporting, like we might follow up, but no, I think someone was like payroll records, checks. I don't think, okay, I'm looking at Frank and Christine. I'm like, I don't think that is our intention. So we won't be, requiring a full audit of your financial statements. Just a few questions about how you use the funds and that stuff. And we hope, to Christine's point, that you would want to be in continued partnership with us as we explore like this living wage study. To Christine's point, that'll be sort of funder facing. But again, that's not required. Okay, those were all the questions.
That's awesome.
Yeah, Frank, you keep us moving along.
Nice. So Q&A done at this point. So thank you all. Now we're going to get into the application, and then I have another slide to talk about the overhead because some people had questions about that. So reviewing the application. If you are attending and you are a frontline worker, you saw this on social media or email, and your organization doesn't know about this, you could either send them the link and I could repost that, or if someone could post that, the link to the RFP. If not, feel free to email us at racialequity@svpla.org and let us know who's the organization, who's the main contact, email, and then we'll go ahead and hit up that organization to say, hey, we not sure if you know about this, but we'd love for you to apply. So I just want to name that point first. Second part in the application, again, Kelly was mentioning, we hope that the application wasn't too cumbersome to complete. We had a lot of organizations right off the get-go in the first like 2 hours fill it out. So we thought maybe it's pretty easy to apply, which we wanted. But a couple clarifications, one on the racial demographics. Now this is provide what you can. Again, larger organizations, smaller organizations with less capacity. For the larger orgs with more capacity, you might already have this in an Excel sheet, a Google sheet, a PDF, and you just drop that in as an upload file, which is great. But for folks who don't have that information, feel free to just provide what you can, have it be the most accurate. Again, we either put a narrative box for you to just type it out, or just to upload a Word doc, a PDF, whatever you have. So again, we don't want it to be too cumbersome. Provide what you can, and that'd be great. Along with the pay equity and living wage activities. Again, we know that some organizations are doing this analysis and having these conversations, but just share, again, in a narrative box, just share what type of activities that you are doing. We just love to hear some of the conversations or meetings, convenings that you're having with your staff and with your executive team. And then last but not least, and then we'll go back to Q&A, let's talk about that 15% overhead. Now, this is for folks, and myself included, because sometimes I take a minute to do the math. And we apologize, I did a little screenshot on the application itself. We asked for the total funding that you're requesting at the start. We should have asked that at the end. So bear with me, there's a lot of numbers. This is entitled How to Figure Out Your 15% Overhead. So step one, identify your subtotal. So think about the number of stipends you would like to give out and the amount for each of the stipends. Again, that could be anywhere from 500 to 1,500. So as an example, I want to give out 100 stipends to 100 frontline workers. I want that to be 1,500 each stipend. So that's a total of $150,000. You'll see that right there in the screenshot. And then from that 150 total stipends, then you'll multiply that by 15% and you'll get 22,500. So that's 22,000 in administrative overhead from the subtotal request. So just add your total stipend, and Kelly and Christine, please tell me if I'm saying this so wrong, but add your subtotal with your overhead. So that's 150,000 plus your 22,500 in overhead. Add that together and you get your total amount of 172,500. That's great. That's really great. So go ahead. There's some applications that came in. The math was a little bit off. We are going to do that on the back end. That's totally fine. But to make it easier for you, make it easier for us, if you can go ahead and do that information. If you want to take a screenshot of this slide, great. If not, we are going to have a download link to this slide deck for you on the RFP landing page. And I'll put that in the copy. Kelly and Chris, go for it.
I was going to say, Frank, I'll just jump in to our point about how hard this might be for you all. It was hard for us because our math is incorrect, even in our own form. Most of you have been writing grants, you know the process for overhead, but the process that Frank just talked about is correct, right? So you get your number of stipends, you figure out how much you want to charge them, that's your subtotal, then that's the number that you can apply for overhead on. So it's not to cover overhead for your entire organizational budget. I think that's the clarification. And again, we are seeing the data on the back end, so we can reach out for clarifications, but just wanted you to know that. And yep, to Frank's point, we will make it eligible to other folks. Okay. I'm going to pivot to Christine because I think she has a couple questions teed up. Frank, I'm sorry. Were you going to show a next
No.
slide?
Nope.
Okay.
All good.
I'll pivot to Christine. She's got a couple questions teed up from the chat, and then I'll run through and respond to the others while Christine's sharing.
Great. All right. So I saw, and please feel free to ping us again if your question went by quickly and we missed it. But I'm seeing a question back here. Would those organizations who provided hazard pay or premium pay during the height of the pandemic be less considered for the grant? Definitely not. We're asking you to share with us, in fact, what steps your organization has taken around pay equity and living wage. So please do share that. We'd love to learn from what folks are doing and share those out as practices for the field. Unless that hazard pay or premium pay bumped your folks up over 65,000, that still is below that cap. So absolutely, please do share that with us, and it would not harm your application. I see another question around new employees who were providing daily and in-person services at other orgs. I mean, this is a great area. I can't imagine there are that many folks who fall into that category in your organization. So if you have other folks that you're applying for this stipend for, say you have 20 people on your team you're applying for, and this applies to one or two of them, please do include them. We couldn't have that be the focus of your application, but if it's a couple of many, certainly no need to exclude them. And then the last question that I will speak to, there was a question around maximum headcount. So someone was noting that they might have more than 100 folks who worked through the pandemic. As Kelly noted, if you do the math on that, you will likely, and if you depending on the level of stipend you're providing, if you want to provide a meaningful stipend and you do the math on 100 plus workers, it would likely take you up well over $1 million. So, I would just think that through in your application, knowing that I would say we are unlikely to provide a grant more than 100,000, given the volume of applications we'll receive. There is no cap, but just saying, we would be able to provide 10 grants at 100,000, and we'd like to be able to do as much as possible. So as Kelly was saying, I would think about either you do have the option to provide very small stipends. I imagine you'd like to do something more meaningful. So you might want to think about a subset of folks. If you have a very large team like that, it might be folks who are at the very lowest pay within the organization. You might think about focusing on them, a tranche of folks making 25 to 32,000. I don't know. You can pick a slice of workers that are at a particular level. So that's one option, or as Kelly said, you could think about a team that was especially, really working hard in the early days and out there every day consistently when things were especially tough. So we leave that up to you, but just be mindful that if your request is quite large, we would likely only fund a subset of that.
Thanks, Christine. And I will follow up. Yeah, Christine did average grant amount. Sophia, seeing your question about case managers. I think the distinction, we wanted to, so we worked with some other orgs who provided grants or did some worker adjustments during the pandemic, and they were thinking about who would qualify. And it was really the distinction of like, who may have been at like most physical risk or even like emotional. I'm trying to describe that. So if I was like, obviously I've worked remote the whole pandemic, even though I work connected to services, there was no sort of physical risk that I encountered. So if you have a team of case managers who sort of went to a hybrid at some point, but in the beginning, they were just carrying out their regular duties, seeing patients, clients, going on house visits, then I think they would qualify, right? Even though they might be working hybrid now, if they kept their in-person contact up. That's how I would think about it. And to Christine's point, it might be, less or more. Also hearing some of the requirements now around like what we're looking for, I think that might give you an idea of how to structure it. And then the last thing I'll say, and this might not be common in our sector, but a lot of you have your big agencies and you subcontract with some smaller agencies or agencies that you're trying to work with to fill like a cultural competency need. So would encourage you to just share the info. I know some of you are probably like, oh, this doesn't make sense, but to the extent that you have smaller agencies that are in your network, these might be folks that are in your church network, like not even connected to your agency. We hope you'll share the info. You know, even if it doesn't benefit you directly, there's no harm in just passing along the email, and we'll do another Q&A session. All of this will be on our website. So I would say think of it that way as well. Okay, those are the questions I've seen. Let's see, did we get through them? Christine's responding to Selena's question about wellness. What else? Frank, are you saying anything else?
Christine's covered these.
I think to Camille's question, I would say yes. Project Room Key site, spot 8 definitely feels right. And it sounds like you are understanding like just carving out those folks. IHSS workers who have served our participants during this time frame. I think that counts. I'm looking at, I mean, did they do sort of, were they serving in your shelters? Like, you know, doing sort of direct person contact? Oh, they aren't our employees, but serve our
Absolutely. These are in-home support service workers who we have recruited and trained over the years and who are making all of minimum wage through the state. And they serve our people, particularly those who are living in permanent supportive housing. And they have been like the true warriors out there doing the serving because they have been in there. They never stopped doing that direct service in the person's home during the peak of the pandemic.
Yeah, that's a great question. They would certainly be eligible in terms of our standards, and then we'll defer to you or you all as an agency to figure out, oh, maybe I just want to fund, you know, this group of folks, but I think they qualify. So we would leave it up to your discretion. Anything else? You can drop things in the chat or come off mute, anything that we may have missed. Or Frank or Christine, are you seeing other messages I'm not?
No. And good job handling all the questions, especially in the chat. So that's awesome. We have one more, and so we're going to just leave the chat open for questions. We have one more slide to talk about timeline, and then any other final questions from everyone. So do you want to go through that now, Kelly?
Yeah, let's do that. And then we can take some rapid questions. So as Frank said, we opened the RFP on September 16th. It'll be open until October 27th. We think the application is pretty simple, and we tried to, you know, make it as easy as possible. Let us know if you have feedback. We will do our best to let you know by December 6th. I keep wanting to say we can do it earlier and want to be cognizant of, you know, good timelines and all of that good stuff, but we will let you know by December. Contract execution with us is very simple, so don't read that as like, you know, a LASA or a county contracting process. We'll do that and definitely get you the funds sort of given by December 17th, if not sooner. So that's when you'll have the money. You don't have to give it out in December. Ideally, you would distribute it by June of next year, so June 2022. And then you'll have about 2 months to tell us what you did. Of course, we'll send you a form or something with a few questions, but again, it's not going to be, you know, it's not going to be us auditing your financials.
Kelly, this is Vanessa. How you guys doing? Good to see you.
Hey, good to see you.
So I came in late. Sorry, I was in another meeting. Out of curiosity, what are we going to do with the data? Is it going to be used that's being captured? In terms of demographics of the workers, is it going to be used as an advocacy tool? Is it going to, you know, what's the return on investment in providing workers with additional funds and supports? Is that something that's going to be followed? I definitely, you know, and if not, I definitely would love to play with the idea with the agency to see, you know, what we can do with that. I think we can definitely use it as a leverage around policy and really, you know, supporting workers, not only through the pandemic, but as we continue to see increased numbers of homelessness.
Yeah, Vanessa, such a good question. We agree. That is, so as part of this project, we're doing a separate sort of commissioned research study around living wages, worker salaries, and all that good stuff, certainly to be used as a policy tool, funder facing advocacy tool. I will say we were like, design this table, had all these ways teed up that we were going to ask applicants for their org data. And then we realized that was terrible. Like, not everyone has the info, not everyone has the ability to get the info. So what we've asked for as part of this application process is give us what you have. So if you already did something this year for a funder, you did it, summer of George Floyd, because that was happening. And now we're starting to look at our numbers. Just attach that, just give us that. We are not going to attempt too much to like analyze and mash that data up. But what we will do is, as part of our living wage study, we're hoping our consultant can create a more sort of a repository where all the data will be the same. You know what I mean? Like, we know that this data, because we're just asking for you to attach it or tell us about it, it would be really hard to make sure we're analyzing it with the same stuff. But our intention is to build out that stream of more sort of policy advocacy work around this project.
All right, that's beautiful. That's good to hear.
Yes, we'll put you on payroll. Maybe not payroll, maybe volunteer payroll, Vanessa. Give us all your details.
I'm here to support the work, and I'm here to make sure that workers are taken care of and supported. So if you need me, I'm here. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'll step back. I don't want to take too much space, but thank you for answering that.
Yeah.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, Esteban, seeing your question, certainly mobile shower services. Yeah. Mobile shower services, a lot of folks opened up sort of ad hoc food pantries or drop-in centers for folks maybe that were in shelters and not able to access other, food services because the world was adjusting. So we would think about folks like that. Yeah, Selena, we are working on language. So we realize it reads that way. By June 2022, I'm sorry. So funds should be distributed to staff by June of 2022. We will distribute funding to your organization by December. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. It's just that, the way it's worded on the slide says that funds are distributed to staff in June of 2022. So I was just a little confused. That's all.
Gotcha.
Yeah, thank you for asking that. What else can we tell you?
Yeah, any other questions? And I'm gonna go get
I have a comment.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to turn my camera on just because I want to say thank you. Hi, Christine. I just want to say thank you. I'm glad Vanessa's on this call because I know that several years ago, Vanessa and Housing Works partnered on a study that she did for one of her capstone projects through Antioch in her master's program. And there was some advocacy that she was really pushing on behalf of frontline workers, and at Housing Works, that's something we're doing as well. And so I appreciate the leadership here in prompting this dialogue because it's long overdue. And it's just something that we have to do better in the nonprofit sector about how we are tending to the people that I often refer to as the vulnerable, serving the vulnerable. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Selena. Thanks to each of you. We feel really, fortunate, privileged, I don't know, to be able to be a conduit for these resources, and not just, the one-way conduit to give you all funds, but really to also sort of give feedback to wherever we might have even just a little bit of influence about the things that you want to see for yourself, for your workers, and for the world. So please be in partnership with us. We have time now. If any of you are like, I just want to give you some unsolicited advice about how terrible this process is, feel free. We want to know that. It is our intention every day to be iterating and be responsive. So just know you're welcome. We welcome all of that here or via email or follow up. Any of your thoughts, we welcome all of that. Anything else? We won't force you to hang out with us for your whole lunch hour. We just want to make sure you feel sufficiently heard and like you've got all the resources you need.
My name is Tony White. I have a question. Kelly, you mentioned earlier that, and I'm poorly paraphrasing what I heard you say, but you spoke about this being a beginning of talks of moving in a direction to help frontline workers make a living wage. And what are the plans after this grant is given? Is there anything in the pipe that you can talk about to make it a more permanent situation as opposed to the grant, which I'm very grateful for? Not complaining. I'm just looking forward to normalize having frontline workers make a living wage, since so many of them can't even afford a 1-bedroom with the population that they serve in the community that they work in.
Yeah, absolutely. Christine, I'm happy to answer, and I know you thought a lot about this with the grant. So I don't know if you want to talk about sort of the two-prong strategy.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. And Tony, thank you for the question. This is what we've been grappling with quite a bit as well. That that tension that I think we all always feel of wanting to provide some immediate support and wanting to longer term change the structures and systems. So I think Kelly mentioned at the beginning, we will provide this same pool of funds next year as well. So we will go through this process again. We'll open it up again next fall for an additional round of funding for frontline folks. And then at the same time, we'll be working on this living wage analysis that is essentially to understand what the gap is between the wages in the sector now and what a true living wage would be. So to your point, what does it cost to live in this region that folks are serving? And as we understand what that gap is, that's primarily to then speak to funders to say, this is what it would cost to adequately contract with agencies and enable them to pay a living wage. Because we know as folks who also apply for grants, we know typically when you're applying for funds, the expectation is that you will do more, you will launch a new program, you'll serve more people. And what we need as a sector is for the grant sizes to grow for the work that we're already doing. So we want to have those conversations with our public sector funders, with philanthropic funders to say, we need more robust funding so that you all as providers can be a kind of united front as you're applying to say, yes, this is the wage that we're paying our frontline workers. So this is the grant that we need in order to do that, so that you're not alone, doing that advocacy with funders one at a time. So first we want to understand what is the landscape, what are the resources that are needed, and then both have a conversation with providers to say, how does this sit with you all? To Vanessa's question, to also link this to the racial justice conversations that we need to be having around who is doing the frontline work and where are the inequities in the sector, and then really use this as an advocacy tool and a tool to partner with our funders to support them in better understanding what the sector really needs. So we know that is not a 2-year endeavor. That's going to be a longer haul conversation, but we hope that together we can create a kind of groundswell of advocacy and a voice to this particular issue.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Selena, thanks for that. When I saw Cliff in your question, I was thinking about benefits cliff, and that is something that we've been thinking about as well. We were, I don't know if this is important to folks or matters, but there is a minimum stipend amount. And so we were intentional about being in conversation with our fellows, so folks like Vanessa and Dr. Becky and another group of folks, as well as an advisory board that we have to say, like, what are you seeing? Like, what happened during the pandemic? And so some folks in the cohort themselves had administered sort of COVID relief funds. Other folks were looking at pay equity studies. So we tried to get a lot of data, and the real consensus was meaningful stipends in this moment are what's needed, right? So even some of us were like, oh, $500. And people were like, that could literally pay someone's phone bill for like the whole year, right? For whatever phones. And so the consensus was we really wanted them to be meaningful stipends. So we know that limits a lot and all of that stuff, but that's where that came from. We still wanted to stay under the $600 window in the event that any folks were, on benefits and at that cliff. And then, yeah, Selena, we continue to advocate around sort of professional standards and what those mean. So as part of the Racial Equity Initiative overall, we focus on recruitment. So bringing folks into the sector, thinking with organizations about how they change, job descriptions and all of that, salary transparency on job descriptions. We're doing this equip bucket that involves a fellowship, and then this retention piece, which really is about supporting workers, changing systemic policies that impact pay and other things like that. So we're trying to work across all three streams. We love having these conversations. So if any of you ever want to be in partnership, share some of the work you've done in the past around this, please let us know. We're always happy to have more info.